On October 5, 2012, a 10-year-old girl zipped up her purple jacket, said goodbye to her mother, and walked out into the first snowfall of the season. She was heading to school. She never made it. 5 days later, police would uncover something so horrifying it would shake the entire state of Colorado. And the killer? He wasn't a stranger passing through town. He lived less than a mile away. And his own mother would turn him in. This is the story of Jessica Ridgeway, and what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about predators hiding in plain sight. Welcome to Cold Case Crimelab. I'm your host, and today we're examining one of Colorado's most heartbreaking cases, a case that began with a missing child and ended with a confession that shocked even seasoned investigators. Before we dive into the details of what happened on that snowy October morning, I need you to do something for me. If you appreciate the work we do here at Cold Case Crimelab, if you believe these stories deserve to be told with the respect and thoroughness they demand, then hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below telling me what case you'd like us to investigate next. And subscribe to our channel so you never miss an investigation. Your support doesn't just help us grow, it ensures that victims like Jessica are never forgotten. Now, let's go back to Westminster, Colorado, and uncover the truth behind one of the most disturbing crimes in the state's history. To truly understand what was lost on October 5, 2012, you need to know who Jessica Christine Ridgeway was. She wasn't just a statistic or a headline. She was a real little girl with dreams, personality quirks, favorite colors, and a laugh that filled every room she entered. Jessica was born on January 23, 2002 in Colorado. From the moment she entered the world, her family noticed something special about her. She had what they called an old soul, a child who seemed wise beyond her years, yet who embraced childhood with complete enthusiasm. By age 10, Jessica had developed a fierce sense of independence. She had asked her mother Sarah for her own alarm clock because she wanted to wake herself up for school. Think about that for a moment. Most kids that age need to be dragged out of bed, their parents calling their names multiple times, threatening to take away video game privileges or phone time. But Jessica? She wanted the responsibility. She wanted to prove she was growing up. She wanted to show her mother that she could handle the simple task of getting herself ready for school each morning. This wasn't just about an alarm clock. It was about a little girl taking pride in her growing maturity, in her ability to manage her own routine. Sarah, Jessica's mother, had been both proud and a little sad when Jessica made this request. Proud because her daughter was becoming responsible and independent. Sad because it was yet another reminder that her baby was growing up, that the days of carrying her to bed and tucking her in were becoming more and more infrequent. Jessica had long blonde hair that she liked to wear in different styles. Sometimes she wore it down, flowing past her shoulders and catching the light. Sometimes she braided it, weaving the strands together with the concentration of an artist at work. Sometimes she pulled it back in a ponytail, practical and simple for days when she wanted to play outside or didn't want her hair in her face during class. She had bright, expressive eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Those eyes missed nothing. They would light up when she was excited about something, narrow when she was concentrating on a difficult homework problem, and sparkle with mischief when she was planning something fun with her friends. Her teachers at Witt Elementary School described her as curious, engaged, and always eager to participate in class. Jessica was the kind of student teachers loved to have in their classroom. She didn't just sit passively absorbing information. She asked questions. She raised her hand. She wanted to understand not just the what, but the why and the how. When the class was learning about the solar system, Jessica didn't just memorize the names of the planets. She wanted to know how far away they were, what they were made of, whether anyone had ever been there. When they studied animals, she wanted to know about their habitats, their behaviors, what they ate, and how they survived. Jessica loved to read, particularly stories about animals and nature. She would spend hours curled up in her room with a book, completely absorbed in whatever world the author had created. She loved stories about dogs and horses especially. She would check out every book the school library had about animals, reading them cover to cover, then checking them out again months later to reread them. Sarah would often find Jessica at night, supposedly asleep, with a flashlight under the covers, finishing just one more chapter of whatever book had captured her imagination. Jessica had a particular fondness for purple. It was her favorite color, and her room reflected this preference. Various shades of purple decorated her space: lavender walls, deep purple curtains, a violet bedspread covered in lighter purple stars. She had purple school supplies, purple hair accessories, and whenever given a choice of what color anything should be, Jessica chose purple. It wasn't just a passing preference. It was a consistent part of who she was, something her family and friends knew about her as surely as they knew her name. But what really defined Jessica, what made her special beyond her interests and preferences, was her kindness. In a world where children can sometimes be cruel to one another, where bullying and exclusion are common problems in schools across the country, Jessica stood out as someone who looked out for the underdog. She befriended kids who were being bullied. When she saw someone sitting alone at lunch, she would invite them to sit with her and her friends. When someone was being teased or picked on, Jessica would stand up for them, even if it meant risking her own social standing. She included those who were left out. If teams were being picked for kickball at recess and someone was chosen last, Jessica made a point of making that person feel welcome, of telling them they were going to do great. If someone new joined the class, Jessica was often the first to introduce herself, to show them around, to make sure they knew where the bathroom was and when lunch happened and what the teacher's rules were. Her mother Sarah would later recall finding Jessica giving away her lunch to a classmate who had forgotten theirs, not once, but multiple times. The first time it happened, Sarah had been called by the school nurse because Jessica had fainted during afternoon classes. When Sarah arrived, worried and frightened, she learned that Jessica hadn't eaten lunch. When asked why, Jessica reluctantly admitted that she'd given her lunch to a friend who didn't have one. Sarah had explained to Jessica that while it was kind to want to help her friend, she needed to eat too, and that there were other ways to help, telling a teacher, for instance, so the school could provide lunch for students who needed it. Jessica had nodded, seeming to understand. But it happened again. And again. Each time, Jessica would share her lunch or give it away entirely, unable to stand the thought of someone else going hungry even if it meant she would be hungry herself. This was who Jessica was. This was the child who woke up on October 5, 2012, set her own alarm, got herself ready for school, and prepared to walk to meet her friends. This was the girl who should have had decades of life ahead of her, who should have graduated from elementary school, middle school, high school. Who should have gone to college, maybe become a veterinarian or a teacher or pursued whatever dream called to her. Who should have fallen in love, maybe had children of her own, lived a full and complete life. Jessica lived with her mother Sarah in a modest home in Westminster, a suburban community located northwest of Denver. Her parents had separated when she was younger, but both remained active in her life. Her father loved her deeply and stayed involved in her upbringing, but the day-to-day care fell primarily to Sarah. Sarah worked hard to provide for Jessica, often juggling multiple responsibilities as a single mother. She worked full-time, managed the household, helped with homework, attended school events, and did everything she could to give Jessica a good life. The bond between mother and daughter was extraordinarily close. They weren't just parent and child. They were best friends. They had inside jokes that no one else understood. They had rituals, Friday night movie nights where they'd make popcorn and watch whatever film Jessica wanted to see. Sunday morning pancake breakfasts where Jessica would help flip the pancakes, always making a mess but having fun doing it. Bedtime talks where Jessica would tell Sarah about her day, about what happened at school, about her friends and her worries and her hopes. Sarah knew everything about Jessica. She knew that Jessica was secretly a little scared of thunderstorms but tried to be brave. She knew that Jessica worried about tests even though she always did well on them. She knew that Jessica wanted a dog more than anything in the world but understood that their apartment didn't allow pets. She knew that Jessica had a crush on a boy in her class but was too shy to talk to him. She knew all the little details that make up a person's life, all the things that mothers know about their children when they're paying attention, when they're present, when they love them completely. Westminster itself was the kind of community where people felt safe. Tree-lined streets stretched through neighborhoods where families had lived for generations. Well-maintained parks dotted the landscape, places where children could play on swings and slides, where families could have picnics, where teenagers could play basketball or soccer. The schools had good reputations. Crime rates were low. It was a place where neighbors knew each other's names and looked out for one another's kids. If you saw a child you didn't recognize playing in a yard, you might stop and ask if they were okay, if they were lost, if they needed help. If you saw someone else's child doing something dangerous, you'd intervene just as you'd hope another adult would do if it were your child. There was a sense of community, of collective responsibility for the well-being of the neighborhood's children. People didn't lock their doors during the day. Kids rode their bikes around the neighborhood without parents worrying. Teenagers walked to friends' houses after dark. It was, by all accounts, an ideal place to raise a family. Which is why what happened on October 5, 2012 felt like such a profound violation. This wasn't supposed to happen in Westminster. This wasn't supposed to happen in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else. This was the kind of thing you saw on the news happening in other places, to other families. Not here. Not to people you knew. Not to a little girl who was just walking to school on a Friday morning. That Friday morning followed Jessica's usual routine. She had set her alarm for 6:30 in the morning, just as she did every school day. When it went off, she reached over and turned it off, then climbed out of bed. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, brushed her teeth. She got dressed in the clothes she'd laid out the night before, jeans, a comfortable shirt, and her favorite purple jacket that she wore whenever the weather was cool enough. She went to the kitchen where Sarah was already up, preparing for her own workday. Jessica poured herself a bowl of cereal and sat at the small kitchen table, eating while watching her favorite morning cartoon. She and Sarah chatted about the day ahead. Jessica mentioned a test she had in math, though she wasn't worried about it. She talked about plans to play with friends at recess. She asked if they could go to the park that weekend if the weather was nice. Normal morning conversation between a mother and daughter, the kind of mundane exchange that happens in millions of homes every morning. After breakfast, Jessica gathered her things for school. She packed her backpack with her homework, her textbooks, her notebooks and pencils. She made sure she had her lunch that Sarah had packed for her. She double-checked that she had everything she needed, demonstrating the responsibility and organization that had led her to want her own alarm clock in the first place. Jessica attended Witt Elementary School, located about a mile from her home. It wasn't far, but it was too far to expect a 10-year-old to walk alone the entire way. Sarah had worked out a compromise with Jessica when her daughter had asked for more independence. Jessica could walk from their home to Chelsea Park, a small neighborhood park located roughly halfway between their house and the school. There, Jessica would meet up with two friends who lived nearby, and the three girls would walk the rest of the way to school together. This arrangement satisfied both Jessica's desire for independence and Sarah's need to know her daughter was safe. Jessica got to walk by herself, proving she was responsible and mature enough to handle it. But she wasn't alone for the entire journey, and Sarah knew that once Jessica met up with her friends, there would be safety in numbers. They'd established this routine a few weeks earlier, and it had been working well. The walk to the park took Jessica about 10 to 15 minutes. The walk from the park to school took another 10 to 15 minutes. Plenty of time for Jessica to get to school before the first bell at 8:45. At approximately 8:30 in the morning, Sarah watched Jessica leave the house. Her daughter was bundled against the cold. The Denver area had received its first significant snowfall of the season overnight, and while it wasn't a heavy snow, it was enough to cover the ground and make the morning air crisp and cold. Jessica wore her favorite purple jacket, the one with the hood that she could pull up if snow started falling again. She had her backpack slung over her shoulder, packed with everything she needed for the school day. She carried her school supplies, pencils, notebooks, a binder where she kept her homework. Sarah stood at the door, watching as Jessica walked down the sidewalk. It was something she did every morning, watching until Jessica turned the corner and disappeared from view. She wanted to make sure Jessica got off safely, wanted that last glimpse of her daughter before the school day began. Later, Sarah would replay this moment in her mind thousands of times, wondering if there was anything different about that morning, any sign that something was wrong, any indication that this would be the last time she'd see her daughter alive. But there was nothing unusual. Jessica had seemed completely normal that morning. She was happy, in a good mood despite the early hour. She was chatting about her plans for the day, about what she and her friends would do at recess, about the weekend ahead. She was looking forward to Friday, as most kids do, anticipating the freedom of the weekend to come. "Have a good day, sweetie," Sarah called out as Jessica walked away. "I love you." "Love you too, Mom," Jessica replied, turning to wave at her mother before continuing down the sidewalk. And then she turned the corner, and Sarah couldn't see her anymore. It was the last conversation they would ever have. The last time Sarah would hear her daughter's voice. The last time she would see Jessica smile. In 60 minutes or less, Jessica Ridgeway would be gone, vanished as if she had never existed at all. Jessica was supposed to meet her friends at Chelsea Park around 8:40 to 8:45 in the morning. The park was a small neighborhood green space, nothing fancy, just a few pieces of playground equipment, some benches, an open grassy area. It was a convenient meeting spot, easily accessible from all three girls' homes, right along the route they'd walk to school. When Jessica didn't show up at the designated meeting spot, her friends assumed she might be running late. Maybe she'd slept through her alarm. Maybe her mom had needed her to help with something before leaving. Maybe there was some delay at home. The girls waited for a few minutes, checking their watches, looking down the street in the direction Jessica should have been coming from. But there was no sign of her. After waiting about 5 to 10 minutes, the girls made a decision. They didn't want to be late for school. They figured Jessica might have already left, might have gone straight to school for some reason. Maybe her mother had driven her. Maybe she wasn't feeling well and had stayed home. There could be lots of explanations. So the two friends continued to school without Jessica, walking the familiar route they traveled every day. They arrived at Witt Elementary School with plenty of time before the first bell. They went to their classroom, put away their backpacks, greeted other friends. It didn't occur to them to be worried about Jessica. Not yet. The school day began normally. Classes started. Teachers took attendance. And that's when the first flag was raised. Jessica Ridgeway was marked absent. This alone wasn't necessarily alarming. Kids are absent from school all the time for various reasons: illness, doctor's appointments, family emergencies. But Witt Elementary School had a policy, a safety protocol that many schools follow. When a student was marked absent and no one from the family had called to excuse the absence, the school's attendance office was supposed to call home to verify. By mid-morning, around 9:45, the attendance secretary made that call. She dialed Sarah's work number, the primary contact number listed on Jessica's file. When Sarah answered, the secretary identified herself and explained that she was calling because Jessica had been marked absent from school that morning. Sarah's response made it immediately clear that something was very wrong. "What do you mean she's absent?" Sarah said, her voice rising with confusion and the first edge of panic. "I watched her leave for school this morning. She left the house at 8:30. The secretary, now concerned herself, double-checked the attendance records. No, Jessica had definitely not arrived at school. She had not been in her classroom. She had not been marked present in any of her classes. Sarah's blood ran cold. A feeling of dread, of absolute terror, washed over her. She told the secretary she was leaving work immediately and hung up. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed her purse and her keys. She told her supervisor there was an emergency and she had to leave. She didn't wait for a response. She practically ran to her car. Sarah immediately began driving the route Jessica would have taken to meet her friends. Her eyes scanned every sidewalk, every yard, every parked car. She looked at every person she passed, hoping against hope to see Jessica's purple jacket, her blonde hair, her backpack. She drove slowly, carefully, missing nothing. She checked the park where Jessica was supposed to meet her friends. She looked in the playground area, behind the equipment, in the bathroom facility. Jessica wasn't there. Sarah pulled out her cell phone and called Jessica's number. Jessica had a basic cell phone, one of those simple devices parents give their kids for emergencies, for staying in touch. Sarah dialed the number, praying she would hear her daughter's voice. The call went straight to voicemail. Sarah tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again and again and again, each time hoping for a different result, each time hearing the same automated message. She called every person she could think of. She called Jessica's father, asking if he had picked her up for some reason, if she was with him. He had no idea what she was talking about. She called other family members, asking if any of them had seen Jessica, if Jessica had for some reason gone to their house. No one had seen her. She called the parents of Jessica's friends, asking if their daughters had seen Jessica that morning, if Jessica might be at their house. The answers were all the same. No one had seen Jessica since she'd left her house that morning. By noon, Sarah was at the Westminster Police Department, walking through the doors with tears streaming down her face. She approached the front desk and told the officer on duty that she needed to report her daughter missing. The officer, seeing the terror in Sarah's eyes, immediately called for a supervisor. The officer who took Sarah's report could see that this was not a normal missing person case. This wasn't a teenager who had run away after a fight with her parents. This wasn't a college student who hadn't called home in a few days. This was a 10-year-old girl who had been walking to school and had simply vanished. The officer asked Sarah to describe exactly what had happened that morning, what time Jessica had left, what route she would have taken, what she was wearing, whether there had been any problems at home that might make Jessica want to run away. Sarah explained everything through her tears. No, there were no problems at home. No, Jessica had no reason to run away. Yes, she always went to school. Yes, she was responsible and would never just wander off. Something was wrong. Something terrible had happened. Sarah knew it with every fiber of her being. A mother knows. And Sarah knew that her daughter was in danger. The Westminster Police Department immediately recognized the urgency of the situation. A 10-year-old disappearing in broad daylight on a school morning was not normal. This was not a child who had simply lost track of time or forgotten to tell her mother about a change in plans. This was a potential stranger abduction, the kind of case that requires immediate and overwhelming response. Within hours, the Westminster Police had mobilized a massive response. Officers were dispatched to canvass the entire neighborhood where Jessica would have walked. They went door to door, knocking on every house, every apartment, asking residents if they had seen anything unusual that morning, if they had seen a little girl in a purple jacket, if their home security cameras might have captured anything relevant. They reviewed security camera footage from every home and business along Jessica's route. Many residences in the area had doorbell cameras or security systems with external cameras. These became crucial pieces of evidence, allowing investigators to build a timeline of that morning, to see who and what had been in the area when Jessica disappeared. They organized search parties to comb through Chelsea Park and the surrounding areas. Volunteers were already beginning to show up, neighbors and community members who had heard about the missing girl and wanted to help. Police organized these volunteers into groups, assigning each group a specific area to search. They looked in parks, in fields, in wooded areas. They checked behind buildings, in drainage ditches, anywhere a child might be hiding or might have been taken. The FBI was contacted and joined the investigation almost immediately. Child abduction cases fall under federal jurisdiction, and the FBI has specialized resources and expertise in these situations. They have trained profilers who can help narrow down the characteristics of potential suspects. They have access to national databases of known offenders. They have technology and manpower that can augment local police efforts. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation also became involved, adding another layer of resources and expertise. What had begun as a local missing person case quickly escalated into a multi-agency investigation involving local police, state investigators, and federal agents. Everyone understood what was at stake. Every hour that passed decreased the likelihood of finding Jessica alive. The statistics on child abductions are grim. The first few hours are absolutely critical. As Friday afternoon turned to evening with no sign of Jessica, the authorities made the decision to issue an Amber Alert. The Amber Alert system, named after Amber Hagerman, a 9-year-old girl who was abducted and murdered in Texas in 1996, is designed to quickly disseminate information about child abductions to the widest possible audience. When an Amber Alert is issued, information about the missing child appears on electronic highway signs, on television and radio stations, on people's cell phones, on social media. Jessica's face appeared on electronic highway signs across Colorado. Drivers on Interstate 25, on Interstate 70, on Highway 36, all saw the same message, Amber Alert. Missing child. Jessica Ridgeway. Age 10. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Last seen wearing purple jacket. Call police with information. Her photo was broadcast on every news station in the Denver metro area and beyond. The local evening news led with her story. The details were stark and terrifying. 10-year-old girl, last seen leaving her home in Westminster at 8:30 that morning, never arrived at school, no trace of her found. Anyone with any information was urged to call the Westminster Police Department immediately. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the Amber Alert being issued, hundreds of volunteers showed up to help search. These weren't trained search and rescue professionals. These were ordinary people, parents, teachers, neighbors, strangers who had seen the news and couldn't stand the thought of doing nothing while a little girl was missing. They arrived at the Westminster Police Department asking what they could do to help, how they could assist in finding Jessica. Police organized these volunteers, dividing them into search teams and assigning them areas to cover. They distributed flyers with Jessica's photo and description, which volunteers posted on every telephone pole, in every business window, on every community bulletin board. They knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen anything, if anyone remembered seeing a little girl in a purple jacket that morning. They searched anywhere a child might be. They checked parks and playgrounds, thinking maybe Jessica had been hurt and was unable to call for help. They searched wooded areas and open fields. They looked in and around empty buildings and construction sites. They checked drainage ditches and culverts. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and fresh snow was expected overnight. The thought of Jessica being outside in those conditions, alone and scared and possibly hurt, was unbearable. Sarah made a tearful plea on television that evening. She stood before the cameras, her eyes red from crying, her voice breaking with emotion, and spoke directly to whoever might have taken her daughter. The press conference was broadcast live on every local station and was picked up by national news outlets. This was the kind of story that captured national attention: a photogenic young girl, a mysterious disappearance, a devastated mother pleading for her child's safe return. Jessica, Sarah said, looking directly into the camera as if her daughter might somehow be watching, if you can hear this, Mommy loves you so much. You're not in trouble. I'm not mad. Please come home. Please find a way to call me or to tell someone where you are. And if someone has her, Sarah continued, her voice hardening slightly, please let her go. She's just a little girl. She's 10 years old. She's scared. She wants her mommy. She has people who love her. Please don't hurt her. Please let her come home. The image of Sarah Ridgeway, tears streaming down her face, begging for the safe return of her daughter, was broadcast across the country. It was the kind of moment that breaks hearts, that makes parents hold their own children a little tighter, that reminds everyone of how fragile safety is, how quickly a normal day can turn into a nightmare. Friday night was agonizing for Sarah and for everyone who loved Jessica. Sarah couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything except wait by the phone hoping for news. Every time it rang, she jumped, praying it would be the police saying they'd found Jessica safe. Every time, it was someone else, a family member calling to offer support, a friend asking if there was any news, a reporter requesting an interview. The police worked through the night. There's a 48-hour window in missing child cases that investigators call the critical period. After 48 hours, the likelihood of finding a missing child alive drops dramatically. The Westminster Police, the FBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, they all understood this. They worked in shifts, ensuring that someone was always following up on leads, always reviewing footage, always coordinating search efforts. The weekend brought even more volunteers. When word spread through the community about the continued search for Jessica, people came from all over the Denver metro area. By Saturday morning, there were over 1,000 volunteers ready to help search. Professional search and rescue teams joined the effort, bringing specialized equipment and trained search dogs. These weren't pet dogs. These were working animals trained to track scents, to find people who were lost or hiding or, in the worst-case scenario, deceased. The search area was expanded significantly. Police and volunteers divided Westminster into grid sections, ensuring that every square foot was searched methodically. They checked abandoned buildings, thinking perhaps Jessica had wandered into one and become trapped or injured. They searched construction sites where a child might have hidden or been hidden by someone else. They looked in drainage ditches and storm sewers. They combed through wooded areas and open fields, looking for any sign, a piece of clothing, a dropped backpack, any indication of where Jessica might be. But despite the massive search effort, despite the thousands of hours being poured into finding her, despite the dogs and the helicopters and the searchers on foot covering every inch of ground, there was no sign of Jessica Ridgeway. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. By Monday, October 8, 3 days after Jessica's disappearance, the investigation had grown to involve over 100 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, a specialized unit trained specifically for these kinds of cases, had arrived from Washington, D.C. These were some of the most experienced child abduction investigators in the country, people who had worked on hundreds of similar cases, who understood the psychology of child predators, who knew what investigative techniques were most likely to yield results. Every lead, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, was being followed up. Anonymous tips were pouring in through the tip line that had been established. Some of these tips were credible, describing suspicious people or vehicles in the area that morning. Some were less credible, people who thought they'd seen Jessica in other cities, even other states, people who claimed to have psychic knowledge of where she was, people who had theories but no actual evidence. Every tip had to be investigated. Detectives couldn't afford to dismiss something that might be the one piece of information that would break the case open. So they followed up on every call, every email, every piece of information that came in. They interviewed hundreds of people. They reviewed hours upon hours of security camera footage from businesses and homes in the area. Registered sex offenders in the area were being questioned and their alibis for the morning of October 5 were being thoroughly checked. Colorado, like all states, maintains a registry of convicted sex offenders, and those individuals are required to keep their addresses current and to report regularly to law enforcement. Investigators pulled the list of every registered sex offender within a 10-mile radius of where Jessica had disappeared and began the process of interviewing each one, verifying their whereabouts on October 5, checking to see if any of them had any connection to Jessica or her family. The investigation had gone from local to national news. Major news networks were covering the story. Jessica's face was everywhere, on television, in newspapers, on websites, on social media. Millions of people across the country were now aware that Jessica Ridgeway was missing and were hoping for her safe return. Then, on Wednesday, October 10, 5 days after Jessica disappeared, a discovery was made that changed everything. A woman who lived near Patridge Open Space, a park area about 6 miles from where Jessica was last seen, was walking her dog that afternoon. The area is a mix of open grassland and scattered homes, not heavily populated but not completely isolated either. As she walked, her dog became increasingly agitated, pulling toward a crawl space underneath a home that was under construction. The woman tried to pull the dog away, but the animal was insistent, whining and pawing at the ground near the crawl space opening. The woman, thinking perhaps an animal had died under the house and that was what her dog was reacting to, bent down to look. What she saw made her blood run cold. There was a black garbage bag partially visible in the crawl space, and even from several feet away, even without opening it, she had a terrible feeling about what might be inside. She immediately pulled out her cell phone and called 911. Police arrived within minutes. Officers approached the crawl space carefully, not knowing what they would find. They pulled the black garbage bag out into the light and opened it, and what they found inside confirmed their worst fears. The bag contained what appeared to be human remains. But these weren't intact remains. This was not a body that had been hidden or buried. These were partial remains, indicating that whoever had put them there had engaged in what investigators called dismemberment. The area was immediately cordoned off as a crime scene. Crime scene technicians were called in. The medical examiner's office was notified. Every inch of the area around where the bag had been found was searched for additional evidence. And then began the grim task of determining whose remains these were. DNA testing would be required to make a positive identification, and that would take time. But investigators had a terrible suspicion that they knew exactly who these remains belonged to. The size, the approximate age based on bone development, the location, everything pointed to these being the remains of Jessica Ridgeway. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation and through the community. The massive search effort that had been focused on finding Jessica alive, on the hope that maybe she had wandered off and gotten lost, maybe she had been taken by someone but was being held somewhere and could still be rescued, all of that hope was now confronting the brutal reality that Jessica was likely dead, and that her death had been violent. The Westminster Police Department held a press conference that evening. They did not release many details, but they confirmed that human remains had been found and that they were working to determine if those remains were Jessica's. They asked for continued public vigilance and said the investigation was more important than ever. Behind the scenes, the investigation had shifted. This was no longer a missing child case. This was now being treated as a homicide investigation. The techniques, the focus, the questions being asked, all of it changed. Investigators began looking not just for where Jessica might be, but for who might have taken her and why. The autopsy results came back within 48 hours. DNA testing confirmed what investigators had feared: the remains found at Patridge Open Space were those of Jessica Christine Ridgeway. But the autopsy revealed details that were even more disturbing than the simple confirmation of her death. Jessica had been strangled. The medical examiner determined that strangulation was the cause of death. But the condition in which her remains were found indicated that the person who killed her had engaged in what investigators carefully termed post-mortem mutilation. This was not someone who had killed accidentally or in a moment of rage. This was someone who had killed deliberately and then desecrated the body afterward. Some of Jessica's remains were missing from the garbage bag found at Patridge Open Space. This suggested that the killer had dismembered her body and disposed of different parts in different locations. The level of violence and desecration suggested that investigators were dealing with someone deeply disturbed, someone capable of extraordinary cruelty. The community was devastated. In the days when Jessica had been missing, there had been hope. People had prayed for her safe return, had searched tirelessly, had held on to the belief that maybe, somehow, she would be found alive. Now that hope was gone, replaced by grief and horror and rage that someone could do this to a child. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Your engagement means everything to us and helps ensure that Jessica's story reaches the people who need to hear it. A candlelight vigil held for Jessica drew thousands of people. They gathered at Chelsea Park, the place where Jessica was supposed to have met her friends, where her journey had been interrupted by evil. They held candles, they sang songs, they shared memories of Jessica. Parents held their children close, unable to imagine the pain Sarah was feeling, unable to comprehend how someone could steal a child's life. But while the community mourned, investigators were more determined than ever to find who had done this. They processed the scene where Jessica's remains were found with painstaking care. Every fiber, every hair, every tiny piece of potential evidence was collected and catalogued. They photographed everything from multiple angles. They searched the surrounding area for additional evidence, for any clue that might point them toward the person responsible. They continued interviewing anyone who might have seen anything unusual on the morning Jessica disappeared or in the days following. They analyzed traffic camera footage, looking for vehicles that had been in the area multiple times. They reviewed the route Jessica would have taken, looking for any cameras that might have captured something investigators had missed in the initial review. And they got a break. Security footage from a home along Jessica's route showed a maroon SUV in the area around the time Jessica would have been walking to school. The vehicle appeared on camera at 8:32 in the morning, just a few minutes after Jessica had left her house. The footage wasn't perfect, the angle didn't capture the license plate clearly, and the driver wasn't visible. But it was something. Investigators released images of the vehicle to the media, asking anyone who recognized it to come forward. They described it as a maroon or dark red SUV, possibly a Jeep Cherokee or similar model, that had been in the area on the morning of October 5 between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. They stressed that the driver might have information crucial to the investigation, even if they weren't involved in Jessica's disappearance. Maybe they'd seen something. Maybe they'd noticed another vehicle or a person on foot. Any information could be helpful. Investigators also released images of a distinctive wooden cross necklace that had been found near where Jessica's remains were discovered. The cross was handmade, carved from wood, with simple but skilled craftsmanship. It wasn't the kind of mass-produced jewelry you'd buy in a store. Someone had made this cross, had put time and effort into creating it. Investigators hoped someone would recognize it, would be able to tell them who made it or who wore it. The tips started coming in about the maroon SUV. Multiple people called saying they had seen a vehicle matching that description in the neighborhood. Some gave partial license plate numbers. Some described seeing it parked in certain locations. Each tip was investigated, each vehicle owner tracked down and interviewed. Then came another disturbing development that would prove crucial to the investigation. On October 19, 2 weeks after Jessica's disappearance, 9 days after her body was found, a woman in nearby Kettner Lake, a small community not far from Westminster, reported an attempted abduction. The woman, a runner who regularly jogged in her neighborhood, had been out for her morning run when a vehicle pulled up alongside her. Before she could react, someone jumped out of the vehicle and tried to grab her. She fought back, screaming and struggling, managing to break free from her attacker's grip. She ran to a nearby house and called the police. When officers arrived to take her statement, they asked her to describe the vehicle and the attacker. Her description sent chills down the spines of the investigating officers. The vehicle was a maroon SUV. The attacker had grabbed her from behind, trying to cover her mouth, trying to force her into the vehicle. She had seen his face briefly during the struggle, a young man, maybe late teens or early 20s, with dark hair. Could this be connected to Jessica's case? The investigators thought it was too much of a coincidence to ignore. A maroon SUV had been spotted near where Jessica disappeared. Now, 2 weeks later, someone in a maroon SUV was attempting to abduct another victim. The similarities were too striking to dismiss. The investigation intensified its focus on finding that maroon SUV and identifying its driver. They pulled registration records for every maroon SUV in Westminster and surrounding communities. There were hundreds of them. Each one had to be checked, the owner interviewed, their whereabouts on relevant dates verified. Investigators also began to notice something else. The attempted abduction in Kettner Lake had occurred in a specific neighborhood, an area where a number of families with young children lived. Officers began focusing their attention on that neighborhood, interviewing residents, asking about anyone who drove a maroon SUV, asking about anyone who had been acting strangely or suspiciously in recent weeks. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Among the many maroon SUVs registered in the area, one belonged to a family living in Kettner Lake, the same neighborhood where the attempted abduction had occurred. The family lived on Cuevas Way, in the 10,000 block. When officers went to the residence to speak to the owners about their vehicle, they learned something that immediately raised red flags. The family had a 17-year-old son named Austin Reed Sigg. And according to his mother, Mindy Sigg, her son had access to and regularly drove the family's maroon Jeep Cherokee. More concerning, Mindy told the officers that Austin had been acting strangely ever since Jessica's disappearance. She said he seemed anxious, withdrawn, not himself. He was spending even more time alone in his room than usual. He seemed jumpy, nervous, particularly when news reports about Jessica came on television. The officers asked if they could speak with Austin. Mindy agreed and called her son downstairs. When Austin appeared, the officers noted his age, 17, and his general appearance. He matched the general description the jogger had given of her attacker. They asked Austin if he would be willing to answer a few questions about the family's vehicle. He said yes. The initial conversation was brief and relatively casual. The officers asked Austin if he had been driving the maroon Jeep Cherokee on the morning of October 5. Austin hesitated for a moment before answering. He said he might have been, he wasn't sure, he'd have to think about it. The officers thanked him for his time and left, but they were now very interested in Austin Reed Sigg. Over the next few days, investigators began looking into Austin's background. He was 17 years old, a high school student, though he was enrolled in an online school program and did most of his coursework from home. He had no criminal record, not even minor infractions. He had never been in trouble at school. On paper, he looked like a normal teenager. But Mindy Sigg was becoming increasingly concerned about her son's behavior. She later told investigators that she began looking through Austin's room, something she admitted she had never done before, respecting her son's privacy. What she found horrified her. She discovered women's clothing hidden in Austin's closet, clothing that didn't belong to anyone in the family. She found violent pornography on his computer, images and videos depicting extreme violence against women. She found notebooks containing writings that described violent fantasies, detailed descriptions of hurting and killing people. And then she found something that made her blood run cold. Hidden among Austin's belongings, Mindy found items that she recognized from news reports about Jessica Ridgeway. She found a purple backpack that looked exactly like the one Jessica had been carrying when she disappeared. She found glasses that matched the description of Jessica's glasses. She found the wooden cross necklace that police had released photos of, asking if anyone recognized it. Mindy Sigg was faced with an impossible realization. The evidence in her son's room suggested that Austin was involved in Jessica's murder. Her own child, the boy she had raised, the son she loved, might be responsible for the most horrific crime Westminster had ever seen. The decision Mindy made next took extraordinary courage. On October 23, 2012, she picked up the phone and called the Westminster Police Department. When an officer answered, Mindy said words that no parent should ever have to say, "I think my son killed Jessica Ridgeway." She told the police about the items she had found in Austin's room. She gave them permission to search her home. She gave them permission to interview Austin. She provided them with everything they needed to investigate her own son. Later, people would praise Mindy's courage in coming forward, in choosing justice over protecting her child. But for Mindy, the decision was agonizing, tearing her apart even as she knew it was the only right thing to do. When officers arrived at the Sigg home on Cuevas Way in Westminster, less than a mile from where Jessica had been abducted, they found Austin in his room. The officers asked if they could speak with him, and Austin agreed. They asked if he knew why they were there, and Austin's response sent chills through the room. He simply said, "Is this about Jessica Ridgeway?" The officers asked Austin if he would be willing to come to the police station to talk further. Austin said yes. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't refuse to cooperate. He simply got in a police car and allowed himself to be taken to the Westminster Police Department. At the police station, Austin was read his Miranda rights, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. Austin waived those rights. He said he would talk to the detectives without an attorney present. And then Austin Reed Sigg began to confess. What followed was a confession that shocked even seasoned homicide investigators who had heard countless confessions from countless criminals over the years. Austin's confession was detailed, methodical, and chilling in its lack of emotion. He described exactly what he had done to Jessica Ridgeway, and as he spoke, it became clear that this was not a crime of opportunity or a moment of poor judgment. This was planned, predatory, and profoundly disturbing. According to Austin's confession, on the morning of October 5, 2012, he had woken up with the urge to act on fantasies he had been having for years. He got into the family's maroon Jeep Cherokee and began driving around Westminster, looking for a victim. He wasn't looking for anyone specific. He was looking for someone vulnerable, someone alone, someone he could overpower. He drove through several neighborhoods, and that's when he spotted Jessica. She was walking alone on the sidewalk, heading toward the park where she was supposed to meet her friends. She was small, she was by herself, and she was exactly what Austin had been looking for. Austin pulled his vehicle to the side of the road and got out. He approached Jessica, and in that moment, Jessica's fate was sealed. The details of what happened next are difficult to recount, difficult to even think about. Austin grabbed Jessica. She tried to scream, but he covered her mouth. She tried to fight, but she was a 10-year-old girl and he was a 17-year-old male who was significantly larger and stronger than her. He forced Jessica into his vehicle. The entire abduction probably took less than 30 seconds. Anyone who might have been looking out their window at that exact moment might have seen a teenager helping a child into a car and thought nothing of it. And then Austin drove away with Jessica, and she was gone. Austin drove Jessica to his home on Cuevas Way. His mother and younger brother were there, but they were asleep, unaware that Austin had brought anyone home. Austin took Jessica to the basement, to a space where he knew they wouldn't be disturbed. And there, in that basement, Austin kept Jessica alive for hours. Jessica was terrified. She was crying, begging to be let go, pleading with Austin to take her home to her mother. She promised she wouldn't tell anyone what had happened. She said she wouldn't get him in trouble. She just wanted to go home. But Austin had no intention of letting her go. He had never intended to let her go. From the moment he grabbed her off that sidewalk, he had planned to kill her. Austin strangled Jessica to death in that basement. He used his hands, applying pressure to her throat until she stopped breathing, until her heart stopped beating, until the terrified little girl who had just wanted to walk to school that morning was dead. And then, in an act of depravity that still shocks those who know the details of this case, Austin dismembered Jessica's body. He spent hours in that basement, cutting apart the body of a 10-year-old child. He put some of her remains in a black garbage bag. He kept other parts separate. He kept some of Jessica's belongings, her backpack, her glasses, as what investigators call trophies, items that serial offenders sometimes keep to help them relive their crimes. Later that night, after his mother and brother had gone to bed, Austin took the garbage bag containing Jessica's remains to Patridge Open Space, about 6 miles from his home. He found the crawl space under the home that was under construction and shoved the bag inside. Then he went home, went to bed, and the next morning acted as if nothing had happened. For the next 2 weeks, as the entire community searched desperately for Jessica, as thousands of volunteers combed through fields and parks hoping to find her alive, as her mother made tearful pleas on television begging for her daughter's safe return, Austin Reed Sigg went about his normal life. He watched the news coverage of Jessica's disappearance. He saw the Amber Alerts. He knew what agony Sarah Ridgeway was going through. And he said nothing. But the urges that had led Austin to kill Jessica didn't go away after her death. They persisted. And 2 weeks later, he attempted to act on them again. He saw the woman jogging in his neighborhood and decided she would be his next victim. He tried to grab her, tried to force her into his vehicle, but she fought back harder than he expected. She got away. And that attempted abduction would ultimately lead to his arrest. Austin also confessed to the attempted kidnapping of the jogger, admitting that he had been trying to abduct another victim because the urges he had felt before killing Jessica had returned. He described these urges as overwhelming, as something he couldn't control even though he knew they were wrong. When investigators asked Austin why he had killed Jessica, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. He said he had been fantasizing about kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering someone for years. He had watched violent pornography. He had read about serial killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. He had studied their methods. He had imagined what it would feel like to have complete power over another person, to be able to decide whether they lived or died. And on October 5, 2012, when he saw Jessica walking alone, he decided to turn his fantasies into reality. He said he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. He wanted to experience the power, the control. Jessica wasn't a person to him in that moment. She was an opportunity to satisfy his curiosity, to fulfill his fantasies. And so he took her, and he killed her, and he destroyed her body, all because he wanted to know what it felt like. The arrest of Austin Reed Sigg on October 23, 2012 sent shockwaves through Westminster and beyond. The news spread quickly. Police had arrested a suspect in the Jessica Ridgeway murder. But when people learned who the suspect was, the shock deepened. He was 17 years old. He lived in the community. He had no criminal record. He wasn't on anyone's radar as a dangerous person. He was, by all outward appearances, a normal teenager. Who was Austin Reed Sigg, and how did a 17-year-old boy become capable of such monstrous acts? Investigators, psychologists, and the community all struggled to understand. Austin was born and raised in Colorado. He lived with his mother Mindy and his younger brother in a modest home in Westminster. His parents had separated when he was younger, but by all accounts, his childhood had been relatively normal. There was no history of severe trauma or abuse. His mother was involved in his life, worked to provide for her children, made sure they had what they needed. By all accounts, Austin was an intelligent young man. He had been enrolled in traditional school through middle school but had switched to online high school courses, studying from home. His grades were decent. He was considering college. He had shown interest in various subjects and seemed capable of academic success. But Austin had a secret life that no one knew about. While his family thought he was in his room doing homework or playing video games or engaging in normal teenage activities, Austin was spending hours immersed in violent fantasies. He researched serial killers extensively, reading about their crimes, studying their methods, learning about how they had avoided capture and what had eventually led to their arrests. He watched violent pornography, images and videos depicting extreme violence against women. These weren't mainstream adult content. These were depictions of rape, torture, murder. Austin later told investigators that he had been viewing this kind of material since he was in middle school, since he was 12 or 13 years old. He wrote detailed fantasies in notebooks, describing scenarios in which he kidnapped, tortured, and killed people. These weren't casual daydreams or the kind of dark thoughts that many people occasionally have. These were detailed, planned scenarios that Austin returned to again and again, refining them, adding to them, imagining them with increasing specificity. Austin later told psychologists that he had been having these violent thoughts since he was in middle school, around age 12 or 13. He described feeling different from other people, feeling disconnected, feeling urges that he knew were wrong but couldn't seem to control. He said he tried to suppress these feelings, tried to ignore them, but they only grew stronger over time. Those who knew Austin outside his family were stunned when he was arrested. Neighbors who had seen him around the neighborhood described him as quiet and polite. He would say hello if they greeted him. He never caused any trouble. He seemed like a normal, if somewhat shy, teenage boy. Teachers who had worked with Austin during his years in traditional school remembered him as smart but withdrawn. He didn't have many friends. He didn't participate much in class discussions. He seemed to prefer being alone. But there were no concerning incidents, no violent outbursts, no behavior that would have raised red flags about him being a danger to others. This is what made Austin so dangerous. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't act like a monster in public. He was able to present a normal facade to the world while harboring violent fantasies in private. This is what experts call a stealth predator, someone who appears normal on the surface but is profoundly dangerous beneath. But in hindsight, there were perhaps some warning signs that went unrecognized or unreported. Austin was extremely isolated. He had few if any friends. He spent the vast majority of his time alone in his room. He had difficulty connecting with peers. For some teenagers, this might just be normal introversion or social awkwardness. But for Austin, this isolation allowed his violent thoughts to grow unchecked, with no positive influences to counter them. His internet search history, later examined by investigators, showed an obsession with violence, death, and serial killers. He had searched for things like, how to commit the perfect murder, how to avoid getting caught, how long does it take for a body to decompose, what happens to a body after death. These searches began years before Jessica's murder, showing that Austin had been planning, fantasizing, and researching for a long time. The question that haunted everyone who learned about this case was, how did a 17-year-old develop into someone capable of such evil? What happened in Austin's life to create a monster? Psychologists who later evaluated Austin struggled to provide a clear, satisfying answer. Unlike many violent offenders, Austin didn't have a history of significant trauma. He hadn't been severely abused as a child. He hadn't witnessed extreme violence. He hadn't suffered neglect or abandonment. He came from a middle-class family. His mother loved him and was involved in his life. There was no single incident, no clear trauma that explained his descent into violence. Some experts suggested that Austin suffered from severe antisocial personality disorder and potentially psychopathy. Individuals with these conditions demonstrate a profound lack of empathy, an inability to connect emotionally with others, and an ability to commit extreme violence without apparent remorse. They don't feel guilt the way most people do. They don't experience empathy when they hurt others. Other people aren't fully real to them in an emotional sense. Austin demonstrated many of the classic signs of psychopathy. He was able to describe Jessica's murder in calm, detached terms, showing no emotion, no remorse, no recognition that he had destroyed a family and traumatized a community. When investigators asked him if he felt bad about what he had done, he seemed confused by the question, as if he didn't understand why he should feel bad. His fantasies had escalated over time, growing more violent, more detailed, more consuming. This is a common pattern with violent predators. They start with thoughts, which become fantasies, which become increasingly elaborate scenarios. Eventually, fantasy is no longer enough. They need to experience the real thing. And that's when they cross the line from fantasy to action, from thoughts to murder. Austin's consumption of violent pornography likely played a role in this escalation. While most people who view pornography don't become violent, for someone like Austin who already had violent tendencies, such material can serve as validation and encouragement. It can normalize violence. It can provide ideas and methods. It can create a feedback loop where the person seeks out increasingly extreme content to achieve the same level of excitement. Austin's mother Mindy faced an impossible situation. She had done what was right by turning in her own son, providing police with the evidence they needed to arrest him. But she was also grappling with the realization that she had raised someone capable of murdering a child. She would later say that she didn't recognize the person Austin had become, that the boy she knew, the child she had raised, seemed to have been replaced by a stranger. In interviews after Austin's arrest, Mindy expressed profound guilt. She wondered if there was something she had missed, some sign she should have recognized, some way she could have prevented this. She questioned her own parenting, wondering what she had done wrong, what she could have done differently. The reality, according to experts who reviewed the case, is that Austin's pathology developed internally. There was likely nothing Mindy could have done to prevent it, short of monitoring every aspect of his life every moment of every day, which is neither realistic nor healthy. On October 23, 2012, Austin Reed Sigg was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual exploitation of a child in the death of Jessica Ridgeway. He was also charged with attempted kidnapping in connection with the attack on the jogger. These were extremely serious charges that carried severe penalties under Colorado law. Because Austin was 17 at the time of the crimes, there was initially a question of whether he would be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. The juvenile justice system is designed for rehabilitation, with the goal of reforming young offenders and giving them a chance to change. The adult criminal justice system is focused more on punishment and public safety. Given the severity and nature of the crimes, prosecutors quickly moved to have Austin tried as an adult. They argued that the brutality of Jessica's murder, the premeditation involved, the dismemberment of her body, and the attempted abduction just 2 weeks later all demonstrated that Austin was not a child who had made a mistake and deserved rehabilitation. He was a dangerous predator who needed to be removed from society permanently. The motion to try Austin as an adult was granted by the judge. Austin was initially held without bond in a juvenile detention facility, but was transferred to adult jail when he turned 18. As the case moved through the courts over the following months, details of the evidence against him became public through court filings and hearings. In addition to his detailed confession, investigators had found overwhelming physical evidence linking Austin to Jessica's murder. DNA evidence connected Austin to Jessica's remains. Forensic analysis found Jessica's DNA in Austin's vehicle and in his home. Fibers from Jessica's clothing were found in Austin's bedroom and in the Jeep Cherokee he had been driving. Austin's internet search history, recovered from his computer, showed searches for topics directly related to the crime. He had searched for information about the decomposition of bodies. He had searched for news coverage of Jessica's disappearance. He had searched for information about how police investigate murders and what kind of evidence they look for. Perhaps most damning, investigators recovered Jessica's belongings from Austin's room. Her purple backpack, the one she had been carrying when she left for school that October morning, was found hidden in Austin's closet. Her glasses, which she had been wearing, were found among his possessions. The wooden cross necklace that had been found near her remains was discovered in his room. These items, kept hidden away like trophies, provided physical proof linking Austin to Jessica's abduction and murder. Combined with his confession, the DNA evidence, the fiber evidence, and the circumstantial evidence of his attempted abduction of the jogger, the prosecution had an overwhelming case against Austin Reed Sigg. Most legal experts expected the case to go to trial. The evidence was strong, but Austin's attorneys might argue that his confession was coerced, that the physical evidence was circumstantial, that there were mitigating factors related to his age and mental state. A trial would allow the defense to present their case, to try to create reasonable doubt, to potentially argue for a lesser sentence. But what happened next surprised many people. On December 3, 2012, less than 2 months after his arrest, Austin Reed Sigg appeared in court for what was expected to be a routine status hearing. Instead, Austin announced that he wanted to change his plea. Against his attorney's advice, against the recommendations of everyone who was counseling him, Austin pleaded guilty to all charges against him. He provided no explanation for why he was changing his plea. He didn't offer any statement about his motivations or his feelings. He simply stood before the judge and said he wished to plead guilty to first-degree murder, to kidnapping, to sexual exploitation of a child, to attempted kidnapping. Some people speculated that Austin didn't want to put Jessica's family through the ordeal of a trial. Others thought he simply recognized that the evidence against him was insurmountable and that pleading guilty was his only option. By pleading guilty to first-degree murder in Colorado, Austin faced a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no chance of early release, no possibility of probation, no opportunity to ever walk free again. He would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. The formal sentencing hearing was scheduled for November 19, 2013, almost a year after Austin's guilty plea. This hearing would give Jessica's family and the community an opportunity to address the court, to speak about the impact of Austin's crimes, to look him in the eye and tell him what he had taken from them. On that November day, the courtroom in Jefferson County was packed with people. Sarah Ridgeway was there, along with other family members and friends. Community members who had searched for Jessica, who had attended her vigils, who had been affected by her death filled the gallery. Media representatives from across the country were present to cover the sentencing. Before Judge Stephen Munsinger imposed the sentence, Austin was given an opportunity to speak. He stood before the court, facing Sarah Ridgeway and Jessica's other loved ones, and made a brief statement. His voice was quiet, almost flat, showing little emotion. "I'll begin by saying I'm sorry, ma'am," Austin said, addressing Sarah directly. "What happened to Jessica, it should never have happened, and I'm sorry." The statement was brief, clinical, lacking the depth of emotion one might expect from someone who had committed such a horrific crime. Some interpreted it as genuine remorse. Others saw it as hollow words from someone incapable of true empathy. Sarah Ridgeway also spoke at the sentencing. She had prepared a victim impact statement, and she read it through tears, her voice breaking with emotion. She described the profound loss of her daughter, the pain that consumed her every single day, the future that had been stolen not just from Jessica but from everyone who loved her. "Jessica was my whole world," Sarah said, her voice thick with grief. "She was my best friend, my companion, my everything. She was the reason I got up every morning, the reason I worked hard, the reason I tried to be a better person. And he took her from me for no reason except his own sick fantasies. He took a beautiful, kind, loving little girl who had her whole life ahead of her, and he destroyed her. He destroyed our family. He destroyed our community. He took something precious from this world and left only pain and emptiness behind." Sarah described the agony of not knowing where Jessica was during those 5 days when she was missing. The desperate hope that maybe she was alive somewhere, that maybe she would be found safe. The crushing devastation when Jessica's remains were discovered. The additional horror of learning the details of what had been done to her daughter. "I will never get to see Jessica grow up," Sarah continued. "I will never get to see her go to middle school, high school, college. I will never get to see her fall in love, get married, have children of her own. I will never get to grow old with my daughter. All of those moments, all of those experiences, all of that joy, he took it all away. And for what? To satisfy his curiosity? To fulfill some sick fantasy? My daughter's entire life was worth nothing more to him than a few hours of entertainment." Others spoke as well. Jessica's friends, who described how much they missed her. Teachers, who talked about the bright student they had lost. Community members, who expressed the fear and grief that had gripped Westminster in the wake of Jessica's murder. When everyone who wished to speak had done so, Judge Munsinger addressed the court. He spoke about the severity of the crime, the impact on the victim's family and the community, and the need to protect society from dangerous individuals. He then imposed the sentence that had been mandated by Austin's guilty plea, life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 86 additional years for the other charges. Austin Reed Sigg was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs and shackles. At 18 years old, he would never again experience freedom. He would spend the rest of his life in a cell, in a maximum security prison, with no hope of ever being released. Austin is currently incarcerated at a maximum security facility in Colorado. Because of his age at the time of his crimes, he is housed separately from the general population of adult offenders, at least initially. He will likely spend decades in prison, aging from a teenager to a middle-aged man to an elderly man, all within the walls of his cell. He will never have a career, never have a family, never experience the milestones of adult life. Every day will be the same: wake up in a cell, eat meals in a cafeteria, have limited time outside his cell, go to sleep in a cell. This will be his existence until the day he dies. The Jessica Ridgeway case left scars on Westminster that have never fully healed. In the immediate aftermath of her murder, parents who had felt comfortable letting their children walk to school suddenly became afraid. Children who had enjoyed the independence of walking with friends now had to be driven by parents or accompanied by adults. The sense of safety and security that had defined the community was shattered. But the community also came together in remarkable ways. The massive search effort that brought out thousands of volunteers demonstrated the best of human nature, strangers coming together to try to save a child they had never met. The vigils held in Jessica's memory showed the community's capacity for compassion and solidarity in the face of tragedy. The support for Jessica's family was overwhelming. Donations poured in to help Sarah with expenses. Meals were provided. People reached out with offers of help, of support, of anything the family might need. The community wrapped its arms around the Ridgeway family, trying to provide comfort even when comfort seemed impossible. In Jessica's memory, Colorado passed legislation in 2013 that became known as Jessica's Law. This law increased penalties for sex crimes against children and required more stringent monitoring of convicted sex offenders. The goal was to protect other children, to ensure that Jessica's death led to positive change that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. Schools across the state reviewed and updated their safety protocols. Many implemented policies requiring students to walk in groups rather than alone. Some schools began offering additional resources for parents about how to keep children safe, about warning signs to watch for, about how to talk to children about stranger danger without terrifying them. A memorial scholarship was established in Jessica's name to help young students pursue their education, something Jessica never got the chance to do. The scholarship helps students who embody the qualities Jessica had: kindness, academic curiosity, a desire to help others. It ensures that Jessica's legacy includes something positive, something that helps other children achieve their dreams. Chelsea Park, where Jessica was supposed to meet her friends that October morning, was rededicated in her memory. A memorial was placed there, a quiet spot where people can come to remember Jessica, to reflect on her life, to honor her memory. It's also a place where children still play, where laughter still rings out, where life continues, just as Jessica would have wanted. Sarah Ridgeway has become an advocate for child safety and victims' rights. She has spoken publicly about her loss, sharing her story in the hope that it might help protect other children, might help other families avoid the nightmare she has lived through. She has worked with organizations that support families of murder victims, offering the kind of support and understanding that can only come from someone who has experienced such profound loss. Sarah has also worked to ensure that people remember Jessica not as a victim, not as a tragic story, but as the vibrant, loving, kind child she was. She shares photos of Jessica smiling, Jessica playing, Jessica being a happy kid. She tells stories about Jessica's personality, her quirks, her dreams. She wants the world to know that Jessica was a real person, not just a headline, and that her life mattered. For Sarah, there can never be true closure. The word closure suggests an ending, a resolution, a way to move on. But you don't move on from the murder of your only child. You don't get over it. You don't find closure. You learn to live with a pain that never fully goes away. You learn to function around a hole in your heart that can never be filled. You learn to survive even when survival seems impossible. Sarah has said in interviews that she thinks about Jessica every single day. Every morning when she wakes up, there's a moment when she forgets, a brief instant before the memory comes flooding back. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone that should have been celebrated with Jessica is instead a reminder of what was lost. Jessica should be 23 years old now. She should be living her own life, pursuing her own dreams, becoming her own person. Instead, Jessica's life ended at 10 years old, in a basement in Westminster, Colorado, at the hands of a 17-year-old who saw her not as a person but as an object to satisfy his violent fantasies. The morning of October 5, 2012 began like any other Friday. A little girl set her own alarm clock, ate breakfast, put on her purple jacket, and said goodbye to her mother. She walked out the door expecting to meet her friends, expecting to go to school, expecting to come home that afternoon and tell her mom about her day. She never made it to the park. She never met her friends. She never made it to school. She never came home. And Westminster, Colorado, and the world, would never be quite the same. Thank you for staying with us through this incredibly difficult story. Cases like Jessica's are painful to cover because they involve real people, real families, and real pain that never fully goes away. We do our best to honor these victims by telling their stories with the respect and accuracy they deserve, ensuring they're remembered as individuals, not just tragedies. If this investigation has affected you, if you believe these stories deserve to be told, if you want to support our work in bringing attention to cases like Jessica's, then I'm asking you to do 3 things. First, hit that like button. It helps this video reach more people and ensures that Jessica's story is heard. Second, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about this case. Tell me what other cases you'd like us to investigate. Your engagement drives our work. And third, subscribe to Cold Case Crimelab and hit that notification bell. We have more stories to tell, more victims to honor, more cases to investigate. Your subscription ensures you never miss an investigation and helps us continue doing this important work. Rest in peace, Jessica Ridgeway. You deserved so much more than the world gave you. You deserve to grow up, to chase your dreams, to live a full and beautiful life. We will not let your story be forgotten.